We're talking about the spiritual affliction of tzaras, which, I think it's incorrectly translated as leprosy. It's not leprosy. It's not a medical disease. It's a spiritual disease that manifests in the skin. We're going to mention later on it has to do with lashon hara, it has to do with gossip, that when a person gossips and speaks badly about another, so that brings about the punishment of tzaras. So, but here we're going to talk mainly about how is it established, since it's a spiritual malady, it's not a physical illness that you need to have a doctor. How do you establish if a person is considered that he has tzaras or he doesn't have tzaras? And there's the Torah describes different types of things about how it has to look, the shades, the colors, how it looks deeper than the skin, it has a white hair growing out of it, it expanded, it didn't expand, it stayed in the same place, it got whiter, it didn't get white. All of these things need to have an expert to be able to determine this. Now, there's a two-part aspect to this. You need to have an expert, regardless if he's a Kohen or not, a Chacham. The Chacham is the one that could determine, is this particular marking, does it fit into the idea of tzaras? And there's like different stages where it has to be examined to see if he's completely Tamei or he's just a possibility that he's Tamei, that he's impure. And then there's the Kohen has to actually pronounce it. Even if the Kohen doesn't know anything about tzaras, the Chacham tells him this is legally considered tzaras, and then the Kohen goes ahead and says this is called Tamei. This type of tzaras is impure. In certain situations, just the opposite as well. The Chacham will say that I have seen that this is, according to Torah, this is pure, but what we need to determine is we need to have the Kohen to actually pronounce it and proclaim it. And this is going to be the main discussion over here at the Sikha. Why does the Kohen have to be involved in all of this? Why isn't it just enough that the Chacham, who is an expert in the halachas, like every other thing, if you don't know if something is kosher or not, you go to a Chacham, you go to the rabbi, and he tells you if it's kosher. You don't have to go to the Kohen to determine if something is kosher. When it comes to tzaras, specifically this, it's not just enough to get the rabbinic opinion to be able to determine is this tzaras or not, but you need to have specifically the Kohen, and that's going to be the main emphasis of the Sikha. Aleph, betumas negoim matzinu shnei dinim klolim. Aleph, re'iyas hanega lekvoye manega tamei eloi muchrachas liyas adei chacham. In other words, what we would call a rabbi. Sheyerenu rabbi. The Chacham has to know this because he got it by tradition. It's just to compare to medicine again. You can't practice medicine without doing internship. You can't go ahead and just read books or watch videos and based on that become a doctor. You need to have actual practice to actually see and participate live in seeing the way, how to diagnose and how to heal and so on. In a similar vein, the Rav, in modern terms, is called Shimush. He needs to learn by a different Rav, by a rabbi preceding him, to be able to know this particular color, this particular skin look is something that's a tzaras. Otherwise, it might just be a skin disease that has no relationship with tzaras. Shirenu Rabbi v'yebaki b'chol negoim b'sheisem b'negei odom kulom b'negei godem b'negei botim. Needs to be thoroughly well versed in all of these details of all these different halachas. V'chacham zeh einay muchrach li is kohen davke el hakoil ksherim liras anagori. To be able to determine this, any rabbi who has the expertise in this, any person who's a chacham in this thing, again, he had to receive this from previous rabbanim and so on. He can determine and say this is considered tzaras, whether it's on a human being, whether it's on clothing, like we learned in this week's parsha, or whether it takes place on houses. Now, the actual pronouncing of the person being Tamei or Toir, Beis, Hatuma Vatara, Tluya B'Koyin. Afilu la'achar shekava Chacham she'hanega Tamei, ein hamenuga Tamei ad sheyomer Kohen Tamei ata. The Kohen needs to proclaim it. Then the tzaras is called a nega, that's Tamei. Nega is another term that's used in the Torah for the tzaras. Val derech zelin ta'arosei. The Kohen is also necessary for proclaiming that the person is pure. Shafilu adam ebeged shenirpa bayanega. Harei nishar betumasi ad sheyomer loy Kohen toher ata. We actually see an example of this by a case of a house that the Torah was very careful about a Jewish person's valuables. The halacha is that items that are found in a house that has this nega tzaras on it, so those things become tamei as well. So it says, before the Kohen actually pronounces that the house is tamei, we empty out the house of all the furniture, because up until the moment that the Kohen does not say that the house is tamei, then it's pure. There's nothing of the tumah, nothing of the impurity that attaches itself to the items in the house. Once the Kohen pronounced it as being tamei, so then the house and all the items in it become affected by that tumah as well. So we see again this idea that until the Kohen actually pronounces it and proclaims it tamei, there's no tumah over here. The Kohen is the one that determines that it's Tamei. The Kohen is the one that determines by his proclamation that it's Toher. Masha amiris haKohen itnai leikuva. Litzer es chalois atum vataram hu ba'ofen kezeh she'afilu Kohen she'eini yedea liris va'afilu hoya haKohen koten oishoitem harei usoymech al divrei haChacham haChacham roi'ehu va'omer loi emor Tamei Va'koyin omer Tamei, and then Amor Toyer, and the Kohen says Toyer. In other words, the Kohen can totally rely on the words of the Chacham. Once the Chacham has said, I saw it, I know it, so he could even be a child. He could even be someone that's not completely by his faculties. He's a shoita, which is very interesting because concerning most concepts in Jewish law, in halacha, if a person is under the age of bar mitzvah, or they are mentally not totally the way they're supposed to be, they're a shoita, so then their actions have no validity. In this case, since the Chacham is the one that actually determines it, and it's only the Kohen that has to say it, so even a Kohen who's a Kohen, who's a minor, or he's a shoita or something like that, his saying is enough, because it's really relying on the Chacham's determination. It's only the Kohen that has to say it. So the Rebbe asks two main questions on this. V'adavar dorish biur alf kivin shesoif Kohen zeh soymech al divrei haChacham l'shem ma nechutza amiras haKohen davke. It seems to be this is entirely the Chacham's determination. Why the need for the Kohen to say it? Why did Hashem decide that only when the Kohen actually pronounces it, that's when it becomes Tamei, and vice versa, when the Kohen, or at the end of the situation, when the Kohen actually says that it left, that it's Tahir, then it becomes Tahir. Beis, Mawa inyan amiyuchad betumas Metzora, asher betumas zu davke amra Torah, chidush kazeh sha'atuma v'atara tluya b'kohen. First of all, the question is, in general, if the Chacham is the one that's determining it, why is it the Kohen that has to say it? Another question is, there are many situations in the Torah where we need to ask the advice of a Chacham. There are many laws, there's many things. You have to determine if something is kosher. You have to determine if there's litigation, that you go before Bezin. The Chacham has to tell you, is this good, is this not good? In no other case in the Torah do we need, on top of what the Chacham is saying, on top of what the Rav is saying, do we need to have a Kohen to proclaim it. Specifically, and only by the laws of Tzaras, that's what we need to have the Kohen. What is the connection between the Kohen and the Tzaras that needs that a Kohen should say it. We know there are certain things in the Torah that are called a decree of the verse, meaning Hashem decreed it so, regardless of our understanding of it. There are certain sets of laws that are called super-rational laws. In a similar vein, the whole idea of tsaras is a super-rational thing, it's a miraculous thing. The Rambam explains it's not a physical disease, it has nothing to do with the physical realm, it's just the Torah distinguishes. There are certain things that are spiritual, and if it doesn't meet the criteria of tsaras, then you know it's a skin illness. But other than that, if the Chacham determines it fits into certain parameters, then it's a spiritual thing, has nothing to do with a skin disease. So if it's something that's a decree of Hashem, so how can you ask questions? The Rebbe is saying, what need is there to explain anything? If something is a decree, it's a decree. It's like asking, why is wool and linen prohibited? Why shouldn't it be wool and rayon or wool and cashmere that's prohibited to mix together? It's not a question, it's a chayk. It's something that transcends understanding. It's super rational, and that's why it is. So how can we ask a question, why specifically over here do you need to have a kohen? The whole halachas of tsaras, all of it is something that's not based on reason. So he says, "Are you do mashkas varambam shafilu chuki atoyre shegzeirasem roil is boinen behem v'chol mashat yochel litin loy tam ten loy tam." This is something that the Rambam says as a rule by everything in Torah. Wherever we could find a reason or figure out a reason or apply a reason, we try to apply a reason and based on that reason to derive a lesson. The Rambam uses actually a very similar example concerning the blowing of the shofar. He says that blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it's gzeiras hakosov. It's a decree of the pasuk. In other words, when you open up the Chumash and you see inside that on the first day of the 7th month, on the day of Rosh Hashanah, you have to blow shofar, it doesn't say why you have to blow shofar. Just says to blow shofar. Other things it says, you eat matzah to remember this and this. You make the korban pesach to remember such and such. But it doesn't say why you blow shofar. In the Torah it doesn't say it. So the Rambam says, even though it doesn't say it, it's a gzeiras hakosov, this is the term that the Rambam uses. Still in all, it teaches you, it has a remez, it has a hint, that the shofar is like an alarm to wake a person up, to do tshuva and so on. In a similar vein, the Rebbe says over here, even though the tsaras is something that the Torah doesn't say any reason for it, there's no logic to it and so on, wherever we could apply and derive from it some type of lesson and some type of logic, we're supposed to apply. Befrat tam sheyesh by tikkun adayis. Tikkun adayis in the Rambam's terminology means something that teaches us how to live our life, a life lesson in our service of Hashem. The majority of the mitzvahs is meant to give us a more spiritual life, to uplift and direct our lives. All the mitzvahs, all the laws are to bring us to have this awe and respect for Hashem that we wouldn't have without the mitzvahs. Therefore, we need to find the lesson in how we are supposed to serve Hashem in this particular directive, that it can only be the Kohen, and only by tsaras do we need to have the Kohen. That's the one that proclaims it. Iker chidush ha'Torah meshat mavatara tluya b'Kohen bo b'pashtus l'dei bitui loy b'taras ha'Metzora ela b'ikir b'zeh shu metamei es ha'menuga shari ha'metzias d'taras ha'Metzora eina yichol lavoi ela b'mekayim shekayemes kvar tumas ha'Metzora. What comes first? Before the Kohen purifies the person. Purifies means after the person was in a state of tumah for a certain amount of time, the Kohen examines the person again and determines, okay, it's gone, you are now in a state of tahara, you're now in a state of purity. When does that occur? Obviously, it can only occur once there was a state of tumah beforehand. So what's the first step in this whole process? First, the Kohen determines that the person was Tamei. Once the Kohen was determining that the person was Tamei, so then the next step, the next phase will be, eventually at a certain time, that the Kohen will proclaim the person Tahir. ולפיכך מסתבר לומר שזה שטהרת המצורע תלויה בכהן הוא תוצאה מכך שהטומאה תלויה בכהן. כלומר כיוון שהטומאה נוצרת רק על ידי אמירת הכהן, לפיכך גם הטהרה מטומאה זו צריכה לחול על ידי אמירה של כהן דווקא. So the Rebbe is saying like this: the main point of consideration over here, the main point that we need to investigate is that the Kohen is the one that makes a Tamei. Once we know that the Kohen is the one that makes a Tamei, so it's automatic. Okay, he's the one that makes a Tamei, so he's the one that has to make a Tahir. But we have to understand, why is the Kohen the one that starts the ball rolling in the first place? Why is the Kohen the one to say that it's Tamei? And as we'll soon explain, it's actually antithetical to what the Kohen is about. The Kohen is just the opposite of Tumah. The Kohen is all about Tahara, is all about purity. Al shafiza kasha oidi oiser bishlei me'ilu haya ikar chiddush ha'torah b'shaychus l'taharasai haya efshel lahavin madu ha'davar tali b'kohen ki yesh kesher ben inyan ha'kahuna l'matzav shel tahara sharei adin hu shekohen also le'li tamei. We know a kohen is prohibited from entering a cemetery, from participating directly in a funeral. He's not allowed to even be under the same roof with a dead body, etc., etc. A kohen needs to be in a state of purity. So it makes sense that he would be the one to ensure purity. So he would be the one to say that things are tahir. But, v'lechein kahanim hem mashpiim tahara b'Yisrael. Aval madua yia kohen dafke zesh tafkide lifel tuma b'adam Yisrael. Here the Kohen is doing something just the opposite of what he's about. The Kohen is all about retaining a state of purity, and if he's about retaining a state of purity, so he should be influencing and bringing purity to Klal Yisrael. Why would he be the one to say this person becomes Tamei? So the Rebbe says, V'yesh loymar echad habiyunim b'zeh. One of the explanations we can give. Betumas Metzora matzinu chumra shloim nimtza lachaver betumas acheres. We know there's multiple different things that could bestow tumah upon a person. One of the classic things is being in contact with a dead body. That brings about a very severe tumah. It's called ava tumah. It's called one of the most severest of tumah. And yet, there is something more severe by the tumah of a Metzora that there is not to be found by even any other of the impurities that there is in the Torah. What does it say? Bodad yeshiv mechutz lamachne moishavei. The person who's proclaimed a Metzora needs to be outside of the encampment. He has to be alone. There are the three camps. There is what's called the Machne Shechina, Machne Levia, Machne Yisroel, which corresponds to, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, it corresponds to the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. But even outside of the camps, he has to sit alone. You don't have a whole group and gathering of these Metzoraim together. The Metzoraim may not be with other people that are Tamei. וזהו גם התוכן הרוחני של טומאת צרעת, טומאה חמורה כל כך, המוציאה האדם הטמא בה מחוץ למחנה הקדושה לגמרי, וכאילו רחמנא ליצלן יצא מכלל שייכותו לישראל גוי קודש. When he is proclaimed as being in such a state, It's as if saying that spiritually, he is in a totally different place. He's like outside, there's an expression in English, beyond the pale. He has no connection with any other Jew. That's why we separate him. The reason for it has to do because one of the reasons for the Tumas Saras is Metzora, we're going to have soon, is like a combination of the words Motzi Shem Ra, that he spoke negatively about another Jew. So since he spoke negatively about another Jew, so therefore we separate him from other Jews. You made separation amongst the Jewish people, so you now become separated from the rest of the Jewish people. But here's a very important point. Who is the one that could say about another Jew that he doesn't belong to Klal Yisrael, even temporarily? Chacham mi uzashi yuchol lifsek al Yehudi acher shemekoymel mechutz lamachn de kedush rachman l'slan ach v'rak kohen. It takes a kohen to be able to say that. In yonei shel kohen hu levarich es Ama Yisrael ba'ahava. That's the bracha that the kohenim make right before birchas kohenim. They say to bless the Bnei Yisrael ba'ahava. This is a very important point. There's a lot of mitzvahs that we make brachas on, but we don't emphasize that we're doing the mitzvah out of love. Doesn't say, let's say, that we're putting on tefillin out of love. Asher kiddushon mitzvos mitzvon la'nich tefillin ba'ahava. Likvoya mezuzah ba'ahava. Albir chametz ba'ava. When it comes to birchas kohenim, the bracha that the kohenim have to give the Jewish people has to be with love. And it's a crucial and important part of what the kohen's mission is. He is about kindness, he is about love. Kohen hu ish hachesed. HaMevorich es Yisroel. The very fact that he benches, the very fact that he blesses another Jew, that shows that his idea is he's a level of kindness. V'davke ba'ava. And the Rebbe brings down, it's brought down Shulchan Aruch, ki yadua shezoi t'nai ikri b'birchas kohenim. A kohen may not bless the congregation if he has any enemies there. Because he must do it out of love, and if he cannot leave go of his negative feelings towards someone, is she chayeves lias ba'ava ad shim chaser adover chas shalom etzal kohen ha'mevorech hareizu sakana b'shviloi. This is a danger. This is what's brought down Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, because it has to be ba'ava.
What's the sakana?
I don't think it says what the sakana is. It says it's a sakana for it. It's in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, I think he brings it down. V'achin mahai taima sha'koyin hu ish hachesed semeches ha'toira rak olav lahoitzi al Yehudi psak hazeh shemechutz lamachna meishavai. Who is going to take, as the Rebbe is going to explain, the most care to when they need to dismiss a Jew from the Jewish people, even temporarily? Someone whose entire being is about love and about kindness. You don't allow someone else to get involved in pushing another Jew away. You need to have someone whose the ultimate job is about kindness and love. It says there's an interesting pasuk. It says in Parshas Shoftim. Or it says not in Parshas Shoftim, not in Parshas Shoftim, in Sefer Shoftim, I think. HaKohanim bambacher Hashem alakecha l'sharsei levarech b'shem Hashem v'al piyam yeh kol riv v'kol nega. What's the connection between the beginning of the pasuk and the end? The beginning of the pasuk says that Hashem chose them to bless the Jewish people. And then he says that by the Kohen, every argument will be decided, and every nega is another term for tzaras. Dafke mitzad zeh shebam bocher Hashem levorech b'shem Hashem lefichach v'al piyam yeh kol nega. Only someone whose relationship with another Jew is a loving relationship, only that person can be the one to determine, okay, even from a state of love, I need to put this Jew outside of the encampment temporarily. That's obvious. Obviously, a precondition to all of this is it has to be based on Torah law. Before you dismiss a person from Klal Yisrael, it has to be based completely and thoroughly on Torah law. Therefore, you need the Chacham, that his Chacham, this rabbi, received it from his rabbi, and so on, that really knows the laws very well. But when you actually have to put it into practice, Ki hu davke yargish as maloi hachoimer shebahitzas psak din kazeh al Yehudi acher. He will be the most sensitive to the severity of the situation. He will feel for the other Jew. It will touch him the most. And therefore, v'lechein lo yachsech kol yegia v'yachker v'yidrash heitev itzlachacham v'yidus psak din ha-Torah he will be focused on making sure and asking again and making sure, because that's what he's about. He's about kindness. There are people that learn things in theory, but something that you learn in theory, where it doesn't have a practical application, you're not going to immerse yourself so much to the nitty-gritty and make sure, does this actually work, or is this just a nice theory on paper? If it's something that matters in the actual real live world, so then you're going to really go into it in depth, because you need to apply it in the real world. In a similar vein, the Chacham has the theory of what makes something be considered a negatzaras. But the Kohen is the one that has to actually pronounce it. And he, being an Isha Chesed, wants to ensure that as much as possible, no Jew should be set apart in such a type of way, and he's really going to push the issue as much as possible to make sure that it was really gotten well. ומאידך הדבר, בטוח שהכהן ישקיע כל כוחו ויכולתו להביא לאחר מכן לטהרס המצורע. So there is also this idea that the Kohen will ensure to this. First of all, now you know that the Torah ruling is not just theoretical, it's practical, because he made sure that it had the most practical application. And secondly, he won't just leave it at that. He'll try to find the ways and the opportunities to make this person tahor, because he cares about another Jew, because he's a person of love, he's a person of kindness. So he's going to be interested in finding opportunities to make this person tahor. The Rebbe brings actually an interesting point in the Ha'ara. There's a discussion, the Rebbe says, it mentions in the footnote, whether there is a mitzvah on the Kohen to say that the person is Tamei. But there's a mitzvah for him to say that the person is tahor. So in other words, this is what the Kohen is really about. Trying, once he proclaimed him Tamei, it should eat at him. And it should occupy his mind. And it shouldn't just be I diagnosed him and now let it just take its own course, let it run its course. No. I, as a Kohen, a Isha Chesed, I need to make sure to be there and ensure and try to make sure that he becomes Kohen, that he is rejoined to the Jewish camp. So the Rebbe applies this in a very obvious way. Umekan lamadno hayra berura. Kisheroya adam davar loy toiv rachman letzlam b'chaveiroi. Va'af nidma loy sha'alo nimtza b'shval ha'matziv ad kedei kach shahoitzi es atzmim min ha'klal. Even the Haggadah uses that term on the Ben Rasha. A person observes another Jew, and he sees that he's doing things that the person has completely taken himself out of the community. And sadly, we can say that we've witnessed that in the past year or so. So what do? Do I right away put him aside? No. You can be the greatest sage. You can be the greatest rabbi. You can't just go ahead and dismiss and cut off a Jew from Klal Yisrael as low and as bad and how much you think he himself separated himself from Klal Yisrael. Chayev ulivchoin velachker heitev ba'atzmoi ma matzovai hapnimi b'midas hachesed v'Ahavas Yisroel. I need to examine myself. Before I remove someone from Klal Yisrael, I need to see how my kindness is doing, how my love of another Jew is doing. If I examine myself internally and I see I'm not a loving person, so I've not met the criteria of being a Kohen. Therefore, I have no right to say anything negative about another Jew. I have no right to put that person outside of the pale, because I know I don't have sufficient love for another Jew to justify my excluding that other Jew. It could be that the reason why I am excluding this Jew is not because I'm so devoted to Hashem, it's not because I'm so devoted to Torah, but rather it's because my own nature, my own character traits have not yet been refined. That's what midos biltim mevoraris mean. It's a Chassidus terminology. I have not yet transformed myself to be a completely idealistic and loving person. So I need to test myself, I need to examine myself, I need to make sure that I am not doing this because I'm a mean person. There are people that we know are very mean-spirited people, and they're the first ones to jump up and say, oh, that person is a this, and that guy is a that. No. A person that's naturally mean-spirited, that hasn't worked on themselves, that hasn't elevated their character traits, has no right, as terrible as you think that other Jew is, to say anything negative about another Jew. To say something negative about another Jew, you have to be like a Kohen. You have to be completely kind and loving, and the Kohen is the offspring of Aaron Kohen, who was Oyev Shalom v'Roidev Shalom. He loved peace, he pursued peace. Then, when you're at that type of stage of love for another Jew, only then can you have the right to say, well, that person placed himself outside of the pale. HaTorah meres ha'negek shel ha'atzmai einu yotzer tumah. El rak psak v'amiras hakoyin ish ha'chesed Tamei ata poilim sha'Metzora yeh Tamei. V'nimtza she'adam she'einu koyin ish ha'chesed ha'poisek al Yehudi acher ki mechutz l'machna me'shavoi harei hu doiver sheker. Just like, in the simple sense, if someone that wasn't a Kohen would say, you're a Metzora, you have to go outside of the camp. He's lying. It's a lie. It's untrue. So the same thing, someone that's not internally a person that loves another Jew wholeheartedly, and if he says something about another Jew, you don't belong to the Jewish people, that means he's speaking falsehood. So he's actually guilty of the very actual sin that he's saying that person is. That we said before, Metzora we mentioned is a contraction of the three words Motzi Shem Ra, speaking negatively about another. And why does leprosy come about? Because he spoke negatively about someone else. You that are now saying that he's a Metzora are the one that's guilty of it itself. That this is what the laws are of someone that speaks negatively about someone. So it's a very interesting law about Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara does not mean that you are saying something that's untrue. Negative speech means even relating something that's a true thing. He said that exactly. Can you imagine that? I get this terrible physical affliction that I am destined to be sent out of the camp, sometimes for weeks on end. Why? Because all I said was something that's true. I said something bad about something that's true. So the same thing, this person that is saying about another that you belong outside of the Jewish camp, when you're not a Kohen, you're not an Isha Chesed, when you don't have the pure Ahavas Yisroel of a Kohen, you are in that same boat. Elahu Motzi Shem Ra Omer Sheker al Chaveroi. Umayta Kante. So what do you do with a person like this that says something bad about another Jew? So he has to go out of the camp. Bodod Yeshiv Mechutz L'Machna Meishavoi. Ad Sheyargel Atzmei Lahabit Al Zolasoi Ba'ayin Toiva. Oh lovely Bodol Mishar Yisroel V'loi La'afriya Lam B'Divir Lashon Hara V'Yitzah Shem Ra Shaloi. Some very interesting spin on this. Why does the person that speaks Lashon Hara, that speaks negative speech about someone, have to be outside of the camp? Don't bring your negative speech into other people. Even amongst the other people that are Tamei, you have to stay away from, because we don't want to hear your negative speech. Don't shut up. We don't want to hear it. We send you away. Don't even be outside of the camp with other people. We don't want to hear it. When he finally gets used to, instead of speaking negatively, he gets used to looking positively with a good eye on every Jew. So then that is considered tshuva, that is considered a healing for him spiritually, and therefore the spiritual malady of tzaras will leave him. And the result of that is Ahavas Yisroel amitis ba'ifin shel avas chinam, pure love for no reason, mevatelas asibas hagolus, which is sinas chinam, needless hate brought about the exile. Shenikras tzarua, exile itself is also called tzarua. Vazai b'derech memelo miyad ba agula amitis v'ashleimai de Mashiach tzidkenu v'mheir v'meinu mamish. So then automatically, by us countering that and training ourselves to look at another Jew with a good eye and removing that whole negativity from amongst us, that itself will usher in the Geula with Mashiach.